Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 3 of Climbing Mounts CMMC. Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mounts CMMC, the podcast. We are so excited because today we have a special guest with us, Andy Sauer. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andy.
My absolute pleasure. I'm excited. And I love that you address the audience as climbers, because what a mountain we're all on. So I'm super pumped.
That's right.
I have a fun story about mountain climbing that maybe I'll share toward the end, but I use it sometimes.
Okay.
It's a good metaphor.
I'm going to have to hear that because I actually know nothing about physically climbing. I mean, I think you could assume that when looking at me, but yeah, I've never.
Well, I can tie it into CMMC, and I can tie it into what one adventure it has been to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. And I have a good story from my younger life of taking on mountain climbing sight unseen after living my whole life at sea level. So we'll talk about that for sure.
That's wild. I'd love to hear that. Well, if you guys don't know, my name is Kaleigh Floyd, and this is also who I have with me, Bobby Guerra. We are a part of Axiom. We are an MSP provider that has just recently gone through our CMMC Level 2 assessment, something that us and Andy actually have in common.
That's right.
And so we are really excited because normally, you'd call us competitors, but in this space where all of us are learning and doing these things together at the same time, it's been super cool to watch Andy and his company, Sentinel Blue, and how they have grown and adapted. And I've literally been on this climb the same time as us doing amazing things. So we're very excited to have him on and share his perspective as well.
Well, Andy was before us, man. He was he was around when CMMC dirt was old. We came in a little bit later. But you started the CUI channel, right, of excellence?
I did, yeah. So there's a Discord in the community called the CUI Center of Excellence, which is a tongue-in-cheek thing that arose in the early days. And my claim to fame is the founding of that, and then some of the subreddits associated with NIST controls and CMMC.
Because you started your channel, you started your journey 8 years ago or something, right? 7,
Yeah,
6?
so I started working at a defense contractor in late 2017, right when this was going into effect. My background was MSP. I was a help desk, sort of worked my way up, and then was a lead engineer. And then I took on an IT management job to get out of the MSP world for a little bit. And it just happened to be a defense contractor who, at the end of my interview was like, "This is all great. This sounds awesome. Have you heard of NIST 171? Can you do that?" And I was like, sure, I'll figure it out. Sounds like ISO or something like that. And boy, if I could go back and tell young me what I was starting down in 2018.
The tiger you were grabbing by the tail.
Yeah, and it's been nonstop. It's been relentless since. But yeah, that's those are the early days, if there are early days in all this. There's people who've been at it even longer than I have, but if there were old magic, it's like from the Chronicles of Narnia. Don't quote the old magic to me. I was there when it was made. That's kind of how I feel about CMMC sometimes. I remember CMMC 0.4 before there was a 1.0, let alone a 2.0. So
wow,
it's been fun.
That's cool. That's so cool. Well, if you can share just a little bit about who your company is, Andy, and what you guys do, just to share for those of you who might be new to this podcast and new to Andy, if you'd like to share with that audience, 100%. That would be awesome.
So Sentinel Blue, we're a managed services provider, managed security services provider. We're 5 years old now. So I started the company in earnest in 2020, though the LLC existed in 2019. And I started it by marrying up two skill sets I'd put together, working in MSP for most of my professional life, and then marrying up what I had learned working for that defense contractor for a couple of years and building the 800-171 program. Married those up together and then tapped into a network that I've been organically developing through the community, largely through Discord and through Reddit and LinkedIn. That largely started because I just needed people to talk to, because I was like, what is this? Who's doing this? What is GCC High? I was one of the first small businesses into GCC High, and I needed to talk to other people. Like, hey, what changed in your tenant this week? Because in the early days, it was day to day. New features were finally coming in. So it's just the culmination of a good mix of skill set, proper timing, a lot of luck, and a lot of really cool people.
5 years? 5 years? Is that right? So
yep.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we started in 2002.
Don't date yourself. Don't date
yeah.
yourself.
You got
So
me quite a lot there.
Yeah, we're very old.
Yeah.
But like we
Him more than me. Chill.
we started thinking about kind of going into the CMMC space just as 2.0 came out, right? So, or where it switched to 3 levels from 5.
Yeah.
And so, so for us, that's when we started seeing, okay, we want to step into that space. But that's funny. That was around the time you kicked in to starting your company, right? So,
Yep.
So,
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of funny how like the circles kind of connect because
I'm excited to hear this perspective because I'm thinking of you, Bobby, who has done this like when you used to go only to travel to companies with a car and you would do the paper invoices
right,
and you
yeah.
would bring them home, and we would file them and
She's
whatnot.
not lying.
So that's the old magic of MSPs, which we can't quote you because I think you were there when that was created.
Right,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, for sure.
But I really do have a question that I think would be so interesting to hear from your perspective too, Andy, and from Bobby's perspective of your systems and environments that you've built as MSPs, because yours was newer when going into CMMC, and Bobby's was a little bit, different. And so I really was curious to ask you guys what the hardest part was when preparing your environments or your systems for that CMMC compliance, which we're talking about level 2 right now, but for the CMMC level 2 compliance. I'm curious about each of you's perspective. Bobby, did you want to start it off or you want to?
Sure. Man, I'm glad you asked me first because I think it's kind of important. Like we started as MSP in 2002, but the difference is you had more experience coming into the MSP space.
Yeah.
In the DIB, I had 0, and I'm coming from being an MSP, and MSPs don't look at compliance the same way the DoD looks at it. There was a lot of bad habits we had to unlearn and start to realize what that meant, and I would say that was probably one of the biggest challenges. Is it was like, if you take the traditional stuff that they even preach in some of the peer groups and other things, like you've got to unlearn that junk and start trying to think about how compliance works in the DoD space. You need to understand it. And there wasn't a peer group for me to go to other than this CUI Discord channel that someone by the chance that happens to be on this call started.
Thanks, Ellen.
But like we were coming into it, trying to learn it and trying to think about how we could try to keep our roots as an MSP, and you got to kind of like put that aside and say, okay, let's think about how we need to really do this from a compliance perspective from the DoD's NIST style of doing things. And that was really challenging because the moment you kind of say I'm all in, I've got to do whatever it takes to make this really happen, that's when you can really start doing it right. I had to kind of have that come to Jesus meeting.
So that makes a ton of sense that would be a sizable challenge.
Yeah.
When I first started Sentinel Blue, we had some consulting work sort of lined up, but I was a sole consultant for a while. And I consulted for a couple MSPs here and there. And I still talk to a lot of MSPs in the community. And their biggest challenge is like they've already established their business processes. A lot of them are already mature, but they've matured down a certain path and they've developed expertise a certain way.
Tool sets that they're used to using.
That's right. There's something of a back to the drawing board that you have to do in a lot of cases to do this right. And for them, that's a monumental undertaking. For me, one, having lived the MSP life for about a decade, but a couple of years after you started, Bobby, I started an MSP on the help desk in 2010. I'd already learned a lot of the mistakes that we were going to make. And then those years at the defense contractor were the first time in my career I was able to dive deep into environments. My technical skill set had grown so much, and I learned a lot more about the mistakes I had been making in an MSP. Then to come out and say, all right, I'm going to start fresh. Well, I've learned a lot of my mistakes. I've already developed a mastery of the subject matter. So it was like from day one, we architected for this end result. So that has been a very easy, advantageous part of our journey. Is that we knew what tools to select. We knew what requirements we were going to have. So we knew what to go out and source and put together. What's largely been difficult for us. Go ahead.
Well, what made you like break out on your own, like right off the break like that? I mean, that's
opportunity.
That's pretty exciting.
Opportunity. That's.
I mean, it was scary when I started mine. I tell you, like we refinanced our house and like tried to get our monthly expenditure down to as little as possible, and just sort of dove in and.
You owned a dry cleaners that you sold.
Yeah.
Not many people I bet know that one.
Yeah, that's true.
I imagine a lot of it is a similar story for entrepreneurs. I mean, I have a history of entrepreneurial pursuits, largely unserious teenager ideas, but I always tell people the stories of the business cards I keep, and I have a number of them in my drawer in my desk still. Because the first thing I would always do is buy a domain name, because that's the most important thing. If you can't get a .com, it's not a company, right? At some level, right? That's what I would always think. So I go buy a .com, and then the first thing I would do is make a business card, and that's where most of my entrepreneurial efforts ended. Was the sourcing of a business card and setting up for a time a Google email account. But
you got to send us some photos. You got to send us some photos.
I need to see.
You know what's funny? One of those businesses was photography, because I bought a camera and thought, hey, I can take pictures.
It all started when you bought a camera. And
so lots of pursuits like that, but always was in my nature, sort of an entrepreneurial idea. And honestly, it was a culmination of opportunity, and largely was due to the network that I developed. I had enough people hitting me on the side, saying, hey, you seem to know a lot about this 800-171. We're looking for a consultant. We're looking for some help putting this together. So it wasn't really a jump into the dark for me. I had, a lot available.
Well, I think I derailed you a little bit on your question answer of like the tool, the challenges, the things that you did. Like what was the challenge for you?
The challenge, first I'm going to tell you what somebody told me when I was starting a business, and maybe you have found this to be true. Is that when you start a business and you're going to operate a business, your personal character flaws are going to be magnified by some order around 10. And I found that to be so very true, to all of its faults.
You have some?
Oh, boy. So my biggest challenges have largely, Sentinel Blue's biggest challenges have largely been derivative of mine.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I have a lot of challenge with structure, right? And I'm an IT engineer, hands-on. I love, getting shit working. Oh, can I curse? Do we need to cut that out?
It's fine.
I'm also going to communicate very naturally as I do. But that's kind of, I've always been maybe a little too cavalier in what I do, and I get a lot of joy and pleasure out of, improving and using technology and pushing the envelope and pushing the boundary. That's been a large driver of our success. I have a lot of, wins that fall in that category, but boy, do I have a lot of losses as well that sort of attitude creates. Having to build a company that's focused on security by way of compliance has, necessitated a lot of structure, a lot of program, a lot of repeatable things, a lot of what you might consider monotonous. And that has been very difficult for me, and has been difficult for Sentinel Blue as a result. Scaling something when you have such high demand for, the types of services our companies are offering to a hungry audience that needs it, is, making us all think very carefully about scaling. And that's made me revisit a lot of my bad initial habits and build something that I'm not super comfortable with. And every day is kind of an adventure and discomfort for me. I've only recently started using the title CEO too, because that for a long time was uncomfortable with with the baggage that carried and whether or not I was fit for it. So it's been a very personal journey for me in terms of the challenges of getting there.
You touched on it, and I went through similar challenge from the perspective of I'm an engineer. Like that's where that's my passion. I love, give me some Intune, baby. Let me get in there and start getting some cool stuff and doing that's what I love to do. And one of the concerns I had as I was growing the business was as I kind of transition into that CEO role of how do I let that go and how do I find joy in what it is that I'm doing now? Tell me when you find that answer,
because I struggle with that still.
Well, trying to watch the troops just accomplish knock out these massive giants is just so exciting for me now. That's sort of where I found it. I miss it. I miss it quite a bit. But
a little bit of jealousy when you're like, that was cool,
well,
man.
I'll tell my guys man, I'm so jealous of you too in this project. I would so love to be doing this right now, but I gotta make sure my team has what they need to do. And that is really, really hard. And, with CMMC, there's so much risk in what you're doing, and you have to carefully guide the ship about how they're doing and what they're doing. And you got to have a good hand on the wheel on that because you can't phone that in. And so I absolutely had to divorce myself from a lot of that engineering responsibility as much as I love doing it. And some of my team pried it out of my hands.
Yeah.
But
I'm familiar with that experience.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
My team who will watch this, we nod their heads furiously when I talk about that because they're like, even still, sometimes I catch myself I'm like, I could write that PowerShell script real quick. And like at this point, my PowerShell writing is elementary at best. And they're like, it'd be great if you didn't commit that.
Yeah, well, you did. Yeah, I also want to touch on something that you mentioned, Andy, which is like something being scalable. This being scalable for a company. I think I see so many people like say online, like MSPs, like explain this to be like the most difficult thing ever when it really is not. And I think people don't understand the perspective that an MSP has to take versus just a regular organization seeking assessment. It's a totally, Bobby mentioned the risk of it. It's a risk with every single client that you take on, but it being scalable, like what Andy was saying, is a whole nother, mountain to climb. You have these engineers or technicians that are on your staff that might not know everything about CMMC, but they have to implement these things on a regular basis and help these clients. It's all about, the scalability of it. I would love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on both of you guys on like it being scalable and how to help, your team learn and grow this, not just you guys as the owners and, implementing it and understanding it yourself, but the team themselves getting on board and how you're able to do that.
Can I take this one first? We'll just alternate.
Please do.
Right. Because I think I can kind of turn somewhat of a question back to you. So doing CMMC level 2, NIST 171, hard enough on its own. In a way, I think doing it as an MSP is doing it on hard mode. There's a lot of additional burden. In some ways, it's also kind of easier. Certainly the way I think the ecosystem is going to be served, MSP is going to be a huge net win for the ecosystem. But as an MSP, I have found it's been difficult because you don't just have the constraints of a normal business and an overhead department within a business running an IT operation, which I've done, and I kind of understand what that life was like. As an MSP, we're already in a community, in a larger MSP ecosystem, which is way too tempted to fight their way down to the lowest possible cost, and you're competing against folks who have, a lot of them have no scruples in terms of selling BS for costs that comes in much lower than what you've accurately tried to portray in a proposal, and you're kind of already struggling to get prospects to understand, my price is higher, but I'm doing it right, and those folks are going to lead you astray. And there's a lot of that, unfortunately, in the MSP community. So you're kind of already in this very competitive space. And then you're also, as much as we try to talk to our clients about partnership and being treated as peers, at the end of the day, the relationship is transactional. There is a check, it goes one direction. There's an invoice, it goes one direction. That's a lot different in my experience than internal IT, where there's a lot more questions about value, and there's a lot more like, we pay X, we demand X outcome. And you're like, hey, for the last 5 years until recently, we've still been guessing at some of what is going to be required. So if I hit you in 2025 with hey, that decision we made 3 years ago about how to set up your system did not pan out because the regulation changed. I apologize for that, but we made, we had to make do with what we knew at the time.
Yeah.
That can be a little more challenging as an MSP.
Yeah, that would have been crazy hard. Like if you started guiding clients 4 years ago, 5 years ago through their CMMC journey, there's no way you did it right. Perfectly. No, there's just no way that you could, because there was so much that was okay back then that is not okay now based on the way the rule was even written.
That's so true. Right.
So that's going to be true 3-4 years from now as well.
Right. So the scale question is so relevant. And I loved, we had a little bit of a banner back and forth in LinkedIn because I was like, all right, I got my level 2 and then the real journey starts. And you're like, yeah, you're basically on the starting blocks, or something along those lines. And like, to me, like do you understand that, the people that have gone through and gotten level 2 themselves are understanding that you're doing it because you care about your clients and you want to get them to where they need to be, but it is just the starting blocks for them and their journey and about how you're going to try to support them. And doing that at scale is crazy tough mountain to climb, because the ecosystem's changing. And then at the same time, you've got the challenge of the fact that, I mean, we're one of like 5 MSPs in the country right now that have a level 2 certification. I mean, we haven't.
It's good guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, we don't have the certificate in our hands technically yet, but we passed our audit.
By the time you release this
perhaps.
recording,
That's perhaps.
I have it on some good authority that today may be the day.
Oh, all right. That would be outstanding. But it's like, when you have that reality of the fact that in some ways the goalpost is going to change, that scale factor is tough. And then for me, me and Adam kind of said to ourselves, when we were ready for our audit in August, we did that kind of that mock assessment. We built a company from the ground up in 8 months from scratch, new systems, new processes. And then we had to turn around to our team and teach them how to use this new system.
Exactly.
And then how are we going to scale this? How are we going to do the change control process between us to the client to us, and how do we do that? Now we got to train our team on how we do all of that. And, all of this was new and we had to come through it. And then, is it scalable? How are we going to do this as we go to grow? I mean, we're right now, as we speak at this time recording, we are hiring, and I think you are too. Like we're constantly going through growth. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon for any of us. And so that is a massive challenge for us.
I think we're very lucky, but I also think businesses like ours, we've made good decisions that have put us on the map and make us an attractive partner to work with. So that's awesome. You love to have a sales pipeline that's saturated, but delivering a quality experience to maintain a reputation, and being able to execute on what you're trying to do and not sell a false bag of goods, that is the challenge. And very similar to you all, we kind of had to build a business as well. Now, thankfully, I was building the literal business. And as we've added people on, this has been the DNA of the company. But similarly, I have had to build processes and structure, again, to things that have largely been in my head or in amongst a small group of people that we're learning for the first time really how to operate and spread. And that's that is a daily challenge and a daily thing I'm personally working on, is making sure my work shifts more to captaining a ship versus being in the engine room kind of a deal. And I like to know everything that's going on. I'm maybe one of those that believes like, hey, a captain should know everything, know how to do every job on their ship, maybe to a fault sometimes. And I tend to get in the weeds, but I have had to look a lot at scaling, and smartly scaling and empowering others and getting the information out of the heads of that small group and into a culture across a company. And I think that'll be the key to, both of our success.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I've been really blessed with a great leadership team that's been able to help me in this journey to try to pull this off. Can you speak to, this is just me asking a question and kind of, sorry, Kaleigh.
You stole my job.
I just stole your job. Sorry. I'm just curious, like your leadership team and how you approach that. Has that changed any in this journey through CMMC as you guys have grown? Because it has for us.
Yeah. No, we've had some changing of leadership. Nothing dramatic. I mean, a lot of it's just been first time establishment. Like we just hired our first sales leader who joined our executive team. And a lot of that's, again, developing new skills or skill set for me in my role, which I've had to come really to terms with and get a lot more comfortable with, telling the people that work for me, hey, I don't know anything about your world, so you're gonna have to teach me while you operate our sales organization, like what a good sales organization looks like. I have no directive for you. But I have found in the last 12 months, really refocused a lot more on pulling together a comprehensive leadership team, getting me very much out of the day-to-day. And I mentioned they'll laugh when they watch it and nod their heads, like forcing me out of situations.
Fire yourself.
Exactly. There's been a lot of I was recently kicked out of a Teams chat, Like we have a channel
You were like,
relevant to like
"What?"
support, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna kick you out," and we don't mean anything by it, but like there's processes that you sometimes are tempted to circumvent, and it comes from a place where I have a lot of esoteric knowledge. And I'll catch something. I'm like, oh yeah, that we did that in 2021, and we did it this way. And they're like, we'll get that answer from you, but we need to work it through the process. And I'm just like, excited. So it's been very much a lesson for me, and it continues to be a lesson. And being comfortable learning every day and trying to get a little better at what I do every day is kind of the way.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears and talk about the assessments and preparing for your company's assessment. I want to talk about when preparing for it, which I know for many years you are preparing for it, but right before, when getting everything together, what was one of the hardest things as an MSP going into your assessments? I guess what I'm trying to say specifically too is something that maybe you weren't expecting to be difficult at first, but then when preparing, you realized how maybe time consuming or how hard it was for you.
See, it's your turn to go first, Bob.
Oh, okay.
I think about my answer.
Okay, all right, yeah. I would say one of the things that we did, and it was incredibly hard, but well worth it. It made our audit shorter. Is we did a self-assessment of ourselves. We used a document we wrote out in there, and we used that self-assessment as a cheat sheet as we walked through the audit with the auditor. We had in there the assessment objectives that we how we answered. So when they were like 311 alpha, for alpha, we had it all written out about, we stole from the SSP, and then we might have had a little bit of extra shading in there. And then we had a box that had to go with around validation test, what would the auditor want to see to feel like it was ready to go? That took me about 90 hours to go through and create from start to finish, of going through and where is it at in the screens, because when the auditor's like, okay, we're doing AC and IA together. We're going to do first with 311. We're doing alpha. I see you have this. How are you going to validate that? Like, you can't just go, like, you gotta you gotta go and be able to share it right then. And so, I was like, I'll go through and write these. And I was like, oh my Lord, this is going to take forever, and I went through because I knew it in my head, but getting it rationally, efficiently written on a piece of paper so that I could speak quickly to the auditor so they could, because we say cut down on dwell time. You don't want the auditor thinking and asking more questions. Right. The faster you can get them to say yes to what you're doing, the faster they'll go on to the next thing. And that was really hard. That was super hard for us.
Yeah, it's like they say, an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of wisdom in your approach, which I'm working to adopt more of, because we did not do that level of prep in that way. One of the key challenges for me has always been this. We've done a number of these. We had a number of DibCACs before, so we were well prepped by the DibCAC experience. But I always struggle to turn in final documents because I'm always like, but just a little more. Let me put a little more. Let me explain that a little clearer. And I'm always, every time when the auditor or assessor is functionally reading back what I've written, I'm like, darn. There was a better way to make that more clear. And so I'm always, fairly late on deadlines where I'm like, just give me like another couple hours. I want to tighten this up. I want to make that diagram look slightly more professional.
That is so frustrating. Yeah, it's so true, because you go back and look at anything you've ever done, you're like, I could have done that better. And CMMC is no different, right? I mean, it's just, oh my Lord. Yeah, there's so many documents that you could spend quality time on, but you don't have all the time in the world to do it.
No, I mean, you could make it literally your full-time job, writing and tightening up documents and preparing 100%. Evidence and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that to bring back to MSPs and maybe the MSP approach to this, we're starting to look a lot more at automation of gathering evidence. Where these first handful, we really have been trying to feel out how assessments are going to go, what evidence is relevant, what's going to be easily explained. Now that we're building that sort of knowledge base, and the ecosystem is building precedent for things that we were going to have a lot of questions on how these things were going to be assessed. With that, now we can look more toward, okay, if I have to do this for 50 companies a year, I can start working on automation to go build these things and do exactly what you mentioned, which I think is a great advice for anybody listening, watching. If you give the assessors sort of a playbook in your SSP of here's how we're doing each assessment objective, and here's the things we're prepared to show you to test this. You're taking a lot of the mental bandwidth off of them, suggesting a pathway, which, by the way, is strong because you're the one who put it there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to make things smoother for you. And I think also a lot of this with assessments, in my experience, has been building confidence throughout the assessment time with the assessors that you know what you're doing. That first day, they ask you a lot of questions. They go all the layers deep. They want to peel back everything. That third, fourth day, when you've been doing that relentlessly, and they're like, dang, they got an answer for everything. You find they just don't have to flip over so many stones.
Yeah,
they're feeling better
so
because
true.
the confidence is built.
Well, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but as an MSP space, MSPs, if you tell an auditor you've got an MSP or you're an MSP, they're like,
Yeah,
we're watching
100%.
you. We're watching you.
There's a lot of skepticism.
Right, a lot of skepticism around it. And I'm not necessarily saying that's not appropriate.
Unwarranted?
Yeah. But, by the end of it, they're like, okay, they've got their stuff together, and there's a little more joking in the last day. There's a little bit more, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. And it tends to go a little smoother, but I agree. And I think eventually, hopefully, we can try to turn that around and try to get more of an optimistic perspective. I see there's still some challenges for MSPs in the future for us to overcome. Inheritance and to negotiate how that's going to happen with C3POs is a big one.
That's still very much a lively debate or a lively discussion. I was part of one earlier today where this is at like the AB level. There's discussion of what is this going to look like? What's the DoD sort of thinking for this? So very much to still be decided.
Yeah, I was literally about to bring up too, what about preparing for, for clients now, talking about we call it, there's one mountain that's us, and the second mountain is helping our clients, and there's really two mountains to it when it comes to an MSP. So what about preparing for that and, the inheritance that has to come with it, and maybe working with the C3PAO as their ESP in this situation rather than the OSA themselves. So.
Yeah, so a couple lessons we've learned, because I mentioned we've done a couple DIBCACs, which we have done with clients, and then we've done 2 CMMC certification assessments with clients since it came out.
Which is huge. That's great.
That's impressive, dude.
It's progress, man. It's progress.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We haven't done that yet. We're looking forward to it, but
it's nerve-wracking, but now you get a couple under the belt. So I've done three DIBCAC highs. With obviously totally different DIBCAC teams every time, and the same frustrations with them every time. The second assessment with the same firm, like a lot of the context setting was already done. And like, hey, we remember this, we talked about this. They still want you to show all the evidence, but they've already built an understanding. They kind of know where you're going. You've
that's
sort
so
of already figured that out.
It's hard to pass something you don't understand. So if they don't understand where you're coming from, that's freaking hard. So
I always tell my story. The first DIBCAC I was in 2021, and we were putting forward a company that was all Microsoft 365 cloud, all Entra ID, what was it, Azure AD at the time, Intune, all that sort of stuff in GCC High. And the DIBCAC team we got came on site because this was in the days when, hey, this was all on site. There was no remote. Their first question, literally, when we sat down and got into the technical, was like, all right, so tell us about your Active Directory. Like, they just came with that pre-built bias, and I was like, well, the funny thing is, hey, we don't have one. And we spent a good part of the first day explaining our architecture because this was a team that was very used to things like FedRAMP, and they were internal auditors primarily in their old jobs. So they're like used to big enterprise systems, and we're like, hey, this is a 200-person company. We don't have servers. We don't have anything on-prem. You guys are here for kind of no reason. It's a nice office. It's in San Diego, California. So it was like, hey, we all got out of, our places where it's probably a lot colder and came to the nice weather. But that's been part of it, is learning how to work with assessment teams. And I love the C3PAO model because we'll have that option to work with the same provider, the same assessor, build that rapport, should mean smoother assessments. Ultimately, I think more cost-efficient assessments for clients. And then the whole thing about inheritance, when you have ESP, MSPs who have their own certs under which all their managed services are provided, I see no reason why the C3PAOs shouldn't be able to have a shorter assessment.
Yeah, for sure.
They shouldn't just take our cert and be like, hey, we're not going to assess anything covered by your cert.
We're not FedRAMP, but there's somewhere in between that we
there's
can
a level of scrutiny that has already been applied.
Right.
And there's a level of assurance that is, provided by that, by the fact this has already been looked at. And if it's the same C3PO who looks at it, they kind of already know, when we pressed you guys on this, you had answers for that. So I think that's going to be a huge boon to the ecosystem, and just kind of harkens back to why I think MSPs who want to play seriously in this space, you need to get certified. I know it's not in the requirements as we thought it was going to be last year. They removed the requirement and ESP holds a cert. But if you're going to be serious about it, there's so much advantage to you and to your clients to have it. I just don't see any reason you shouldn't get it. But CMMC has become a marketing angle, and a lot of the big MSP communities, a lot of the big MSP vendors have been like, hey, did you know CMMC is a new way to increase revenue? If you're not tapping into the CMMC revenue, the compliance revenue, you're going to fall behind. So a lot of them have been sort of languaged to think, hey, this is just a part of my business practice. I'm going to add it, like I'm going to add ISO or SOC 2 or whatever else. And they approach it very reactionary. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we're fairly regularly interacting with prospects and new clients coming from other MSPs who at a time said, CMMC, we got this. 12 months later, they're like, so where's our progress? And the MSP will say, you guys were supposed to lead that. We just said, we'll turn things on as you require and tell us to. That happens all the time.
What do we call that? We call it the
like marriage counseling for
CMMC. Yeah. So the MSP is going to be one partner and the OSA is going to be the other, and you're just going to somehow
walk hand in hand, figure it out together.
My take on this is I after the first DibCAC, I remember kind of feeling like that we passed, we got a perfect score. It was a lot of work. And I remember feeling like I will never sit on the assessed side of the table if I didn't have the majority control in how we got there. Because I didn't want to be on the dumbfounded, like, well, I don't know how we got that. So I always felt the only way to make this successful is to be the leader. The way I explain it to our clients and prospects is like, we're all going to go on this journey together. I'm going to drive. I would like you to decide when we're going to stop. You can pick the restaurant we're going to stop at. But like, I've driven this road. I know this road. Let me drive. I'll clearly be the responsible party. You'll be party to it, a passenger to it. Not like I'm taking you for a ride necessarily. But that's just the only way I see it working. I don't see MSPs writ large being able to be successful as a reactive force. That's like, hey, client, you tell us, how we're supposed to run our audit and accountability practices. You tell us how your system should be configured. It's too esoteric.
I think there are two types of explosions we're going to see. You're going to see the MSPs that are, which we've already talked about, have pretended that they can help their clients and are going to take them through that journey. And sadly, them and the client are going to find out unrealistically how that was. And then they thought, okay, we'll get our level 2 certification now, and then we'll be able to take these contracts that we've been planning on, and it's months away or whatever that time frame is, and that's just happened now. And what do you do? So I know that's going to be happening, and there's going to be a chunk of those that are going to happen, and then I think there's going to be a chunk of other people that just feel like this still isn't a real thing, and they're going to wait until they can't get their contract, and then they're going to like, well, now what do I do? And you're like, well, you're going to have to get level 2 or get out. I mean, that's pretty much the only choice you're going to have. And you and everybody else are running for the exit, and it's full already. Everybody's trying to get through that door, and you waited too late. Like, it's going to be a challenge at that point.
I think so. There's a lot of companies, I think, that have a lot of MSPs who've sort of risen to the top. If I could so boldly claim, we might be among them. who've put in the work and positioned
Right.
themselves for this.
Yeah,
And that's who, if you're a prospect, let me do my sales pitch real quick, put my sales hat on. If you're a prospect in this space, you want to work with one of us. The
Yeah.
experience, the depth of knowledge, the seriousness with which we're taking it. Right now, we're pretty available. During that big rush, we're going to have to be very selective of who we work with. And you may not be the most attractive prospect, especially if you're on the smaller side. I mean, just good business is going to drive organizations like ours that are well prepared to select the more profitable engagements, which tend to be the larger organizations with more project work available and whatever else. If you're not moving on it now and you're not in that beautiful target profile that all MSPs want, you might have a bad time.
I've loved this conversation, and I really appreciate Andy. Thank you for coming on
thanks,
here
Andy.
and stepping onto our side. And for those of you who don't know about Andy and Sentinel Blue, please make sure to check them out on LinkedIn and Andy's podcast, The Watchers, right? Watchers?
That is the
Yeah.
podcast.
The
Yeah. I
Watchers?
appreciate the plug. That's
Yeah,
nice
you're
of you.
welcome.
Are you doing the dive in the deep you with
The dip dive. So
yeah,
Allison Giddens
Allison?
and I, we put that on ice over the summer,
Okay.
largely because I think both of our time we were committing to every
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It became a lot.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick it back up with her. And by the way, she's awesome. If you're not
Yeah.
going to follow me, I don't recommend following me. I recommend following Allison. She's awesome.
That's great.
But
love
yeah, no,
it.
thanks
Legend.
for having me on. It's been
Yeah.
fun. Some closing thoughts, if I could be so bold. I really respect and appreciate the competitors in the space, like you all, who are taking it seriously. There's a lot of competition in the space who don't, and are purveyors of bad information, are not serving their clients well. I'd rather be surrounded by competitors who are doing right by the clients, because that's ultimately why I'm here. I don't want to be part of, a bad outcome. And I'm personally driven by that, and Sentinel Blue is to know there are others who are going to the events, learning the material, trying to be leaders, trying to develop their practices to do this the right way is encouraging. Now, wouldn't it also kind of be nice for me if everyone was bad and we were the only ones who were kind of good on occasion? Sure, that would be nice if you guys would make more mistakes. But it's when you're trying to be a sword surrounded by whetstones that are constantly sharpening all the other swords around you, keeps you sharp, which is nice.
For sure.
And it'll keep us all honest as well. So I appreciate you guys. Bobby, it's a pleasure meeting you in person. We'll see each other again soon, I'm sure.
Sure, absolutely.
There's a CMMC event every other week nowadays.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
good as many as I can, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys again for listening as well. So make sure to tune in next week, next Thursday, for another episode of Climbing Mounts CMMC. But until then, guys, keep on climbing.
Bye.
See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.